Hi, Denise.
I see some familiar faces. Welcome. We're excited to be hosting our secondary edition of the Reading League Utah webinar series with Jeanne Schopf tonight. And just going to start off with, if you're new to the Reading League and what this is really meant to do, just give you a little background before we jump right into Jeanne. So you give me just a few minutes and then it's all Jeanne for the rest of the evening. And with
Thank you
that
for.
said, we're excited to have you, Jeanne. For Utah Reading League, basically we started about a year ago at this time, and the goal of the Reading League is really to advance evidence-based practices to improve learning outcomes, specifically in literacy, but we all know literacy improves other content areas. And our reach in terms of our membership, we're up to over 125 members in just under a year, which is awesome. We're super excited about that, and really targeting teachers, paraprofessionals, instructional coaches, pre-service teachers, administrators, anybody who wants to advance their understanding and knowledge of literacy is welcome. And we offer almost bi-monthly webinars during the school year at this point, just to be able to continue to advance knowledge. And we'll be looking to see what other things people want in the coming years to really engage together, network, brainstorm, problem solve moving forward. So with that said, I am Jennifer Thronson. I'm just the host of these events for the Reading League Utah as a board member over events, and happy to have you here tonight. And if you will type in your name, your role, and where you're coming from, so what part of the state or the country. We've had people internationally to join us over the months of these webinars. Go ahead and use the chat box for that. It will give Jeanne a little bit personalization to
Sure.
be able to target her comments to our audience tonight that is here. And we'll send out a recording. So if you find value in this and you think others would benefit, feel free to share that with them. It's not a proprietary. You're welcome to share the link with others as you see fit. And while you are adding your information in the chat box, I'm going to introduce our speaker so that you can get to know Jeanne and her expertise and background and what she'll be able to add to your value add tonight. So Jeanne is a national board certified teacher, as well as a certified in explicit instruction with Anita Archer, which was, I believe, last year, Jeanne, super fun. She is a literacy expert, motivational speaker, does a lot in the world of leadership. She was has over 30 years experience, both as a classroom teacher, coach, and really now as supporting schools and advancing literacy practices across K-12. She's also a certified John Maxwell speaker, trainer, and coach. She really wants to empower leaders to be able to advance literacy in their schools through systems and comprehensive literacy instruction that is, using the science of reading evidence-based. She's the founder of Pathways Towards Literacy, in which she supports schools in advancing their practice, and is a consultant for a bunch of organizations, the Reading League National, Core Learning, 95% Group, Transformative Reading Teacher Group. She's a busy woman, as you can imagine, and really passionate about oral language. She is just releasing a book of a compilation of authors this April. It's out and available for pre-order. So as you hear what she has to say on oral language and comprehension today, there's actually a full chapter in the book on that, as well as a bunch of other topics around how to support adolescent readers in literacy. The title is Reading is Not Optional. And like I said, it's coming out in April. So we're excited to have this published author, expert in literacy and leadership with us tonight. So Jeanne, I'm going to stop sharing my slides and go ahead and turn things over. So
Yeah,
if you
and I
have
want to
any
say,
advice,
as did you make me co-host?
I can. You should
All
be able to
right.
share no matter what, but I can do that.
I should be able to share no matter what.
Yeah,
Okay.
those are my regs.
Okay. And as I'm getting ready to share my slide deck, thank you so much, Utah, for being here tonight. And also, I have this book coming out in April, and Jen is also one of the authors in the book. So I was very excited that she added so much value to this book to really raise up all readers, particularly in the secondary space. So I'm here to talk to you about productive group talk in classrooms and the power of oral language and reading comprehension. And as Jen said, I was a practitioner of 33 and a half years. So this work that I'll be speaking of you tonight is work that I did in my classroom. Like, this is real work and real time. Everything that I speak to you about is really what I did with my seventh graders in ELA, and encouraged and supported my staff, and also implementing as many opportunities for productive talk in their classrooms. So Jen shared a little bit about my educational background. I do live in Wisconsin. And I am born and raised Wisconsin. I have two daughters. I spend a lot of time in the summer outdoors in nature anytime I can get it. I love camping. I love being with my dogs, and I also serve as I also serve as the president of the Reading League Wisconsin, and I tutor kids in my free time because I certified dyslexia interventionist. So yes, I keep busy, Jen. I keep busy. So. Today, our questions we're going to try to answer today is what is the role of oral language in supporting reading comprehension? What does the research reveal about using oral language in the classroom? Um, how can educators create this culture of talk in the classroom? And then finally, what strategies, what practices can you immediately implement to approach accountable talk and classroom discourse to enhance comprehension? So I'm going to begin today with James Britton. So James Britton is a highly influential British linguistic educator, theorist, and he's known for his famous quote, "Reading floats on a sea of talk." And he emphasizes that culture, classroom discussion and oral language are really fundamental for developing literacy skills. And this actually the bedrock of deep reading and writing. And he argued in his work that talking through ideas, engaging in dialogue, helps students build confidence, process information, develop a language needed for writing. Essentially, talking talking in our classrooms is a base for all literacy skills. So remember, the brain's activity while reading involves speech and print mechanisms rather than just the simple response to evoke by print alone. So, this is about how productive group talk can support comprehension, right? We have to just really be grounded. Like, what is comprehension? And I love the definition from Castles and colleagues, as far as really helping me. You think of, look at that picture, you think about it's comprehension is exactly what that picture is. It is an orchestrated product, right? So comprehension is not a single entity that can be explained by a unified cognitive model. Instead, it's this orchestrated product, right, of a set of linguistic and cognitive processes that operate on the text, interacting in real time with background knowledge, features of the text, and as Jen and I were just saying, the purpose and goals of the reading situation, right? What is our purpose, right? And so thinking about comprehension is a complex task, right? And if we break it down even further, we have to just always ground ourselves in what Goff and Tumner has taught us through the simple view of reading about what comprehension is, right? We know that it's decoding times language comprehension equals reading comprehension. And if we think about decoding, right, word rec, we have phonemic awareness and phonics, times that language comprehension, vocabulary and text comprehension, the underbelly of all those two processes is what? Oral language, right? Right. Language really is everything. That is the bedrock of literacy. So remember, reading comprehension is uniquely predicted by these multiple components of language comprehension. And so the most important goal for literacy instruction, particularly with adolescents, is to increase their ability, right, to deeply comprehend complex texts by making interpretations, generalizations, drawing conclusions. So if we really dial in a little further into this language comprehension, like what do we mean by vocabulary? What do we mean by text comprehension? Let's break that down further. So if we think about language comprehension, right, would it being this product and looking at just language comprehension in of itself, what do we have here, right? We have vocabulary and we have text comprehension. So, what's vocabulary? Well, we know the words, but we have to have language. We have to understand syntax to be able to, and we have to have the inferencing skills. But we also have to have background knowledge that we are integrating. We have to have general knowledge, and we really have to understand text structure. Those are the linguistic processes, right? What about the cognitive processes? comprehension monitoring, working memory. And so we know that language is going to support those processes because that's the underbelly of reading. So when we think about what is oral language, right? We know language is really super complex. When we speak, we coordinate multiple skills and processes simultaneously, right? Just as I'm doing right now. So I'm thinking about, well, what words do I use? That's vocabulary, right? I'm thinking, well, I got to pronounce these words. So what are the sounds in words? Well, that's phonology. Um, the order in which we put the words together, well, that's syntax, right? And then what words in the sentences mean, that's our semantics and how we choose to express that meaning. So, we have all of those parts of the simple view of reading that come into the space of just oral language, speaking. But we can break language down even further, right? So communication is this continuous interaction between speaking and listening, are expressive and receptive language skills. So when we think about this, right, to understand speech, a person has to be able to, and think about this with their students, we have to be able to listen and attend. We have to understand words. We have to understand sentences. And then we have to process language for meaning. To communicate effectively using speech, a person needs to be able to choose the words, plan the sentences, combine the sentences, and speak clearly. So, receptive language, right, includes words that we can understand when listening or reading. And expressive language, expressive vocabulary, includes words that we use when speaking and writing. So, there's a direct connection between syntactic complexity of what teachers say and how well really children use formal language. So if we think about, so how do we support, how does a classroom discourse support comprehension, which is the big reason why we're here, right? How does language support comprehension? Well, we can break it down, right, to things we really want our kids to do. We want them to think deeply about the text that they're reading. We want them to see multiple perspectives, right? We want them to reinforce and use that textual evidence, which is a big standard. We want them to be able to build the vocabulary and language skills. So, classroom discourse supports comprehension by strengthening language comprehension by those two essential components of the simple view, right? So, those purposeful discussions. Students build background knowledge, they clarify their ideas, they make connections, they understand what they're reading. So, all those parts and pieces come into play when we think about classroom discourse, right? Really bringing this rich language that is in our text really to life in our classrooms. What does the research say, right? So we kind of understand like the theoretical models and what a oral language is, but really, what does the research say about productive classroom talk? So let's take a look at this quote here by Catherine Snow and O'Connor. So in reading that quote, right, we know that rich classroom talk is essential. It plays a vital role in developing the comprehension skills students need to understand complex text, right? Frequent opportunities are necessary. Comprehension only grows when students regularly engage with discussion around text. Talk deepens understanding. It helps them it helps them explain their thinking, right? And of course, collaboration matters. Students have to be able to build on each other's ideas, right? So this quote really does underscore how structured, purposeful dialogue is foundational to strengthening reading comprehension. Okay. So, what about Common Core? Well, I know in Wisconsin, we still have our Common Core state standards. We did not rewrite them as a state, but I understand that every state kind of has some degree of alignment to the Common Core, right? Um, and guess what, right? Our Common Core says, particularly in secondary education, we have to have our kids, right, in conversations. They have to be able to collaborate by comprehension collaboration, which is prepare for and participate actively in a range of conversations and collaborations with diverse partners, building on other ideas and expressing their own clearly and persuasively. So We know that we are supposed to be addressing our standards, and somehow we've kind of forgotten about the speaking and listening ones. Yet they support comprehension, right? Students need to be able to integrate and evaluate information presented in a diverse media formats, including visually, quantitatively, and orally. And then finally, evaluate speakers' point of view. So we know the standards are there. Are we addressing them in our classrooms? We also have in front of us, right, this incredible document I use all the time, the IES practice guides for improving adolescent literacy. And one of their core practices in the IES guides is effective classroom, is discussion, which is students must be provided opportunities for extended discussion of text meaning and interpretation. Has strong benefits for our students by making sure we have discussions in our classrooms. So what does the practice guide ask us to do? You can see it's completely aligned to the standards, right? Prepare for discussion by selecting materials, have the kids ask follow-up questions to extend the conversation, provide a task or discussion format for students can follow. They can discuss the text in small groups. So really, we know that effective discussions are critical for student learning. Um, and of course, final bullet, right? Develop and practice the use of a specific discussion protocol. Like we have to have that in our classrooms for our students to be successful. So, I don't know if I'm in airports, I see parents in restaurants, and this is really what I see, right? I see a lot of kids today that are not engaging in any kind of conversations with their families, with their friends. They're on their phones, right? And so there's a great study that I want to share with you here today. And if you take a look at that, it's pretty powerful, right? So, the important points from this quote: teens are spending less time in face to face interactions. In person and social experience have decreased in the digital age. We see it all the time. More time is spent online. There's fewer spontaneous real time conversations. This decline is evident in families and classrooms, and it highlights the need, right, of growing, intentionally creating these opportunities for rich real time dialogue in classrooms. How much are they spending on screens? How much do you think they're spending on? How much time do you think they're spending daily on screens? Drop a number in the chat. What are you thinking? I'd like to see what you're thinking. Jen says 6. Anybody else have a thought? 3, 3. Way too much, Karen. 6. And are we even talking about the time they're in devices in schools? Right? So I'm a strong advocate in getting kids off devices in schools. Well, this is what the research says here. I got to close that chat so I can see it. There you go. Surprised? Teens spending more than 7 hours a day on screen. And so that's the reality, right? Again, too much time, so therefore not having enough verbal interaction, not having those verbal exchanges. So that this is why, right? We really need to have language-rich classrooms. Kids need to be talking. Because in all reality, um, we also know from the research that classrooms that were more discussion orientated produced higher literacy growth during the year than those with sustained discussion were less frequent. So we know through the research that discussion orientated classrooms lead to greater literacy growth. But it's got to be sustained discussion, right? Not just talking, but extended, thoughtful conversations, um, rather than just answering questions, right? This is the greatest lever of change in our classrooms is getting kids talking. It is. And of course, right, when we talk about research, we have to bring in what John Hattie is teaching us in all of his research, right? And so we know anything above 0.40 is going to have positive effects. Look what discussion is 0.82, right? 0.82. So it has a high impact on student achievement, well above, right, the typical threshold of point 0.4, right? This means structured, intentional discussion in the classroom is a powerful instructional tool to boost learning outcomes. How much? How much should a student have of production in a class period? How much talk do you think? Individual student, what would you say? What are we aiming for? Each individual student. 20 minutes, that's a good one. We would love Bernice to get to 20 minutes. And so what we're really aiming here, we're really aiming here for a good, we should aim to ensure that each student has an opportunity of 7 minutes of production per class period. That's doable. But you got to remember, we got to get all students, each kid having that amount of opportunity every day. Every day. So Hattie's findings in the 7 minute benchmark highlight this urgent need for intentional, equity-centered classroom talk that gives all students, right? All students opportunities for classroom discussion. But in all reality, how much discussion do you think they're actually getting a day? So think about a 60-minute ELA block. What would you put in the chat? Less than 2 minutes, Burmese. That's a pretty good one. Isn't it just crazy if we know it has such incredible effect size? How we're not creating intentionally our classrooms for kids to be talking? Because this is what the research is telling us, how much time they're getting, right? So, in one large study, sustained discussion in ELA classes in middle and high schools found on average only 1.7 minutes out of 60 devoted to extended discussion. It's not enough, right? It's not enough. Particularly if we want to close those reading gaps with our kids, right? We got to get them talking. They're reading complex texts, and we're asked to answer complex questions, but yet we're not asking them to speak with any complexity, right? Remember, it's that see talk we have to have, right? Because there's another great study I didn't address that reading is parasitic onto language. That's Lieberman's work. So if we want kids to be skilled readers and writers, we have to get them talking. So how do we foster a classroom culture that enables all students to enhance their comprehension through structured talk? Right? What's the first thing all teachers in secondary, all the way actually through school, should be doing? Instituting a no raising hands policy. Because we know the kids that raise their hand, right? The kids that raise their hand are the good students, the confident students, English proficient students. And think about this, in the middle and high school, there are very few confident students in our classrooms because of the gaps in their skills in reading. And so by raising hands, right, we're not getting everybody to talk. And the ones we need to be talking, they're checking out. So that's the first step. What's the second step? And the second step is space communicates. That's Arnita Archer, right? We have to organize our classroom for learning. Space communicates. So our classrooms need to arrange a space so that The teacher is able to provide an explanation and directions to the students in a teaching arena. So in front of the room. So all kids have access to the teacher, right? Nobody has their back turned to the teacher. We need to make sure that desks are arranged in paired rows. So you can have partners. This is how we structure it. So in my classroom, I would number my desks, but I had numbered desks. So I'll say 1 through 25. So I always had odd even partners, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and so on. So I could call on the odd numbers, I could call on the even numbers, and I could say ones and twos are talking. So it's a great way to structure talk around the room quickly, easy, and efficiently. All my kids knew they had a number, right? We want to make sure that students are facing the teacher without turning around, and that goes with that paired rows. And we really want to make sure that students can interact with their partners or teams with ease. And the thing with that partnering too, we want to make sure that our high kids are partnered with our high kids because they'll do all the talking for our low kids. And so we want to make sure we have our medium kids with our low kids because they're the ones that are going to support and scaffold all the lower kids to be talking. They'll help them feel more confident. So once we get that no hands policy and once we get our space communicating, that learning, and I loved when every time like I would do one of these techniques that I'm going to share with you today, I would do it at the end of the day, and as soon as the kids walk in, they saw the desks and they knew something was happening to them, and it was great fun. They knew we were going to do something different, and I never wasted time on rearranging desks. That was always done right at the end of the day, getting ready for the next day. So, what do we have to do next? We have to be thinking about our students, right? And um, to build a classroom and culture of talk, right? We really have to think about what Maslow's theory is teaching us and how this applies to adolescent students, right? And so we know, particularly in middle and high school, some of our students, right? They're already shutting down. So we have to ensure that our classrooms are psychologically safe classrooms, that they feel valued. They feel valued and they feel the belonging and they feel good about themselves. Because if they're going to feel that, they're going to engage with text. And a good friend of mine did one of these techniques and she was sharing with me. She teaches high school English and she's like, Jeannie, she's like, I can't get my students to talk. And I'm like, do they feel connected? Do they feel like they're in a community? And do they feel like they can be vulnerable with their students, their classmates? Because in all reality, I think about too, it's Taylor Swift and one of her songs about seventh grade. The only time it's be cool like everybody else is in seventh grade. And so a lot of these kids are just, they don't want to be that vulnerable with their classmates. They don't want to be judged. And so we really have to make sure that we are building these classrooms that are psychologically safe. So what does that mean in real time? I mean, it's as simple as making sure kids have breaks, of water. They have water, they've gone to the bathroom. When my kids got into high school, they couldn't leave the classroom, right? So in middle school, my kids always took a break before they got into my room, so they were ready for learning. Um, this is really important, friends, right? Our teachers, are we monitoring our classroom to address passive aggressive behavior and bullying? It's happening. We don't always know it, and we got to call it out. So, like my dear friend in high school, she sees it, she calls it out, says, this is not happening in my room. You will not bully this student. And so we have to be calling it out. Um, do we make intentional seating arrangements and group assignments for collaborative work? And so one thing that I always did with my students is I had them at the beginning of the year write down, who do you work well with in my classroom? Who do you not work well with? So when I did collaborative groups, they always had one or two people that they worked well with, and they never had somebody in their group that they didn't work well with, because that's just going to be not productive, right? You're not going to get anything out of that experience if they're with people that they're going to just shut down with them, right? So yeah, you have to create that safety with them. And also, I think this is a good challenge for all of us. Are there opportunities for students to share positive, affirming feedback with one another to help build that community? Because if we build a community of safety, kids are going to get to that point of self-actualization, and they're going to get to that point where they're having deep discussions on text. And I saw that happen with my students, and it was a beautiful thing. So getting started, friends, right? So once we have that, we always do have to be thinking about not just throwing kids to the wolves with any kind of discussion technique. We do have to go through the gradual release process, okay? We can't just say we're going to do turn and talk, turn and talk, turn and talk, and turn and talk, or we're going to go do a fishbowl. Or we have to make sure we're patiently modeling, right? I do it. Like we're modeling what it looks like. And then we give kids to see it together. And I often would do fish bowls so they could see it. And then I do a small group and we watch the small group work and then we do it alone. And this work always was done in September and October, right? It was a beautiful thing in May. These kids could just lead they could lead the conversations and I was just there listening to their amazing discussions. But that's really what we have to think about doing, right? And as Anita has taught us, right? If you expect it, you have to pre-correct it. So before we get started, right, we have to make sure that we have those expectations written down, right? We have to have behavioral expectations for all structured talk. We need to have few in number. We need to state the desired behaviors. They need to be short and simple. We want to be observable, begin with a verb, clearly define them, right? And so a lot of times what I would do with my students, right, is I would find some kind of model on social media. I was ones I had, I couldn't find them again, but I would say, okay, we're going to look at this discussion. I want you to be brainstorming all the ways in which you see where it's not a productive discussion. And so this is a fun one. It's short. I think I have time to share it with all of you. And so I would play this and they would be taking their notes. Can you hear it?
No, when you share it, you might have to share it
Okay.
with audio.
Okay. It's okay. So you can just kind of see that they're just sitting there and they're just not really talking. And so we would just watch this, right? And the kids, it'd be fun, they'd be comical, and they would just list, okay, we're not looking at each other, we're not talking, we're not asking questions. And so they see what a bad discussion looks like. And then what I would often do is I would show them, well, now let's look at a really good positive, what made this discussion productive. And this one, I know that there's some, I know I didn't share the volume, but I think you can see the gist of it. And so you can see that they would look at this one and we would brainstorm together. And I did this 4 times and I did this with all my ELA classes. So they would look at this positive one and they could see, okay, I know you can't hear the volume, but you can see they're restating the question, they're looking at each other, they're having, so this is kind of what I would do, right? And then after we saw this, then we would come together and we would brainstorm what are our guidelines. And I'd always say productive group talk. And all the kids had input in it. And we would say, okay, so look at your partner, listen to their words, speak. So only your partner, whatever they are. And no matter what technique I was doing, I always had an anchor chart for them and we would read them together. Now, granted, these are seventh graders, they're little kids in big bodies. They don't have enough accountable talk anywhere else. It's always, if you really want a really good experience, grounding yourself in these guidelines really are successful, right? And not only that, they provide this visual reminder of what are the shared norms, because that's, that's real life. Provide consistency and fairness. They support positive classroom discourse and they support student ownership and they really align to the actions and the values. And so oftentimes, if I would be walking around and I would see a behavior that was not productive, I would gently talk to that student and say, what are our norms for discussion? And they'd repeat them like, okay, is there anything you don't understand? No, okay, good. So I'd always go back to the norms and they were always grounded in that. So they were ready to go. And of course, you're spending time on what participation is because we want kids to participate in this discussion. We want student-led conversations, not teachers. And so we would brainstorm what is participation is. What does it look like? Contributing ideas, asking questions, building on each other's ideas, staying on topic, listening, respecting, maintaining, managing conflict. So we would spend time, and that would also be a part of the expectations. I'd have an anchor chart for that in my room, and we would read them together before we even started any kind of opportunities. Because again, as Anita Archer teaches us, right? if we expect it, we have to pre-correct it, right? All students. So then the next step, right, if we really want our kids to engage in conversation, right, that's that idea of that rigor, right, where we have that environment where every student is expected to learn at high levels, receive support when needed, and demonstrates. But really, to get to that rigorous classroom, right, it really begins with questioning. And so I know everybody's familiar with Bloom's taxonomy, but it's a critical role, right, in shaping classroom discourse, and that supports comprehension. So teachers need to really model questioning. And it starts with just framing our questions around that Bloom's taxonomy. And, a lot of teachers, right, still kind of have gotten away from understanding what a good question is doing and why you're asking that good question. And they're essential. And then we want to build those questioning techniques along with Webb's DOK, right? So it's important for teachers to be grounded in the DOK because it helps them intentionally design and facilitate classroom discourse and accountable talk. So that promotes deeper thinking and learning. And this is teachers have to model these questions, right? Um, Supporting that cognitive demand. And when teachers use the DOK levels to frame classroom talk, they move students beyond that surface level participation into meaningful evidence-based conversations. And this intentional approach, right, will ensure that all students are participating in the discourse of the conversations. Um, and then also, right, breaking it down and making sure teachers really understand what are the different levels and what are they answering, right? So that level one is just your basic recall and reproduction, which we do need, but really understanding that we got to get to DOK2, which are the skills and concepts, the strategic thinking, using the evidence, and then extended thinking. But it's important that teachers have to be modeling the questions. They're the first teachers, right? So if teachers are really strong in questioning, kids will start to pick up on that model of questioning. That's first and foremost. So that's one thing teachers can do. And of course, it's a QAR, right? Teaching use teachers modeling questioning by asking right there questions, think and search questions, author and me. And I was just in some schools in this fall in Wyoming. I did some work in the secondary classrooms. It was great fun, ELA. And many of our high school teachers don't even know what QAR is. They've ever been taught on questioning. So you'd be surprised, right? Just bringing this to them to understand the intention behind your question, right? The critical thinking that has to be plain. And so then what we want to do then is gradually release the students to integrate those questions. So I model using the DOK. Then I have students sort and write questions, whether model you're using the DOK or the QAR, and then gradually give another that scaffolding. They can write, use sentence stems, and so they just build confidence in asking questions. We really have to break that down for them, and because we want students, right, and then use the anchor charts too, and I always had those on my board too. And again, right, we want to make sure that we support kids with that back and forth dialogue. These sentence stems were always on my students' desks, is there for them. And so if I wanted them to extend, right, this is what they had to do. And I guess it was I do, we do, you do. They knew they were there. And even the quietest kids, our kids that have, IEPs, they were talking, right? Like they felt so confident with this technique and with these scaffolds. Everybody was talking in my room, right? Okay, so what are some things that we can do in our classrooms, right, to support talk? Well, I'm going to go through a few of them, right? Paired conversational turns. So there's a lot of turn and talk, turn and talk, turn and talk, but we want to have structured think, pair, shares. Okay. Save the last word for me is a great technique to use with our students. Using the fishbowl technique, using a pinwheel discussion, and finally the Socratic seminar. So I use all of these in my classroom for a variety of reasons. And my students really enjoyed them. And I always was very intentional in my planning because, again, I'm going back to Common Core state standards, right? We have to have speaking and listening standards, and our kids have to be talking. And so I always gave them an opportunity to talk before writing, and this is what I would often do. So let's go ahead and let's talk about those let's talk about setting the stage, right, for that discourse, those conversational turns. And to me, I look at it as like it's scaffolded talk, right? You start with these paired shares, particularly with kids who don't like to talk and are not real confident, and you start building a little bit of success because if they start getting confident and talking with their neighbors and having back and forth conversation, you're going to be able to get them into some of those smaller groups and then the larger group discussion, and they're going to be fairly confident. So remember, these conversational turns are crucial not for language, but also for empathy, right? For critical thinking, mental health, right? For our students, and it does improve academic for performance. So let's talk about, yes, I know everybody, right, have heard of think, pair, share. Um, but let's talk about structured talk. This is the whole nother level. So we want to make sure that all students are cognitively accountable for the thinking and supported in academic language, right? So the first thing it starts with the teacher, right? Having a clear, focused question that we provide think time. And for our secondary students, wait time in writing, giving them time to write down their thoughts, right? Then with that structured pair, right? Students have a predetermined partner. And this is what the learning is growing, right? So if I have my pairs, I'm going to say to my students, ones, you are answering this question. Twos, you're listening. I might say odds, you're answering. Twos, you're listening, and be prepared to report out what your partner said. And so, therefore, that share, you can do a cold call. You can put your sticks and you can call your odd numbers if even numbers were speaking, or you can do a cold call because they've all had a chance that paired share and you can turn in cold call. We want everybody to be accountable for that talk and have that share out time. This is a great scaffolded technique to start using in classrooms to start building that culture of conversation and the accountable talk. Save the last word for me is really a great technique to use when the students are reading a grade level text, right? So whatever it is, they read a grade level text. They choose on their own. So after we've gone through it, like oftentimes I would do this as a homework assignment, right? That they have to choose three significant lines and put them on note cards. And when they came back to class the next day, they get their questions ready, they get their points, they got their homework points, they're participate, they're ready to go. The kids that don't have their questions, basically they lose their points for the day, but then they also have some time at the beginning of class to jot down some questions. They have to participate, right? Then what they do is they write one line on each of the index cards. We put them in groups of four, and they should be structured based on where my kids are at, who works well with, who doesn't work well with, who are my talkers, who are my quiet kids. So they're you don't just throw them, right? They've had practice doing this. They number their cards one through three. Read quotation one to the group. Each member of the group responds to the quote. When others have finished, the one who wrote the quote has the last word. You continue the process until all of the quotes are discussed. And then basically there's a debriefing by discussing how their understanding of the story had been enhanced. And usually that's an exit slip for me. After their discussion, they write down their new thoughts, their new learnings, and that's their assessment for their discussion. And there's my formative assessment. So this is something that can be done anytime there's an opportunity, right, to read a grade level text and you want to get kids talking. You can constantly move kids around different groups, but they love that. They love this opportunity to share their thoughts, and don't we all? Um, Another technique is a literary fishbowl technique. I use this one in my room, right? It enhances comprehension of a story by discussing ideas and posing questions. This is the next level. So after you've done a lot of paired share, you've done the say the last word for me, and we've done a lot of I do, we do, you do. I would never throw kids into a fishbowl. They might literally drown. So I would literally just model, 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 model. They'd watch a fishbowl, they'd evaluate. And so this is something that's a process. We don't want to throw them into it. So again, they are learning how to participate in a discussion here. So how does this work? Right? They have read a narrative text. They write three text-dependent questions, primarily author and me. I've done all that scaffolding, all that questioning work. They're ready to write their questions on their own. And so basically, I have a group. I have fishes, and each fish reads. They're all in a circle in the bowl. Each fish reads one question before the discussion begins. The fish decides which question to go first. Then each fish adds the value. They're all adding and extending. The questions have been fully answered. The fish moves on to the next question. Now, you can have the observer role, right? Where the outside of the bowl, they're taking notes, they're listening carefully, they're prepared to join. Oftentimes, what I love to do is I always had like an extra chair. So anybody who is observer role, if they have a thought that they wanted to share, they could jump in. And that really worked well for me. And then they prepared to say something. Then at the end, they had to say something positive, sincere, or specific to their partner in the bowl. And that's where we get the affirming in, right? Kids start feeling really confident in speaking. Now, it can be to a point where kids are so confident, you can have 4 or 5 bowls going on at once in a classroom where their kids are that independent, and you would not have an observer, you wouldn't have the observer role. So that's kind of how that fish bowl works, okay? Now, some of the more advanced discussion techniques, one of them is the pinwheel discussion. I use these with my seventh graders. This is where the discussion is a structured, student-led discussion that promotes deep thinking, active listening, and collaborative dialogue. In a pinwheel, the class really is organized like that, and I would organize my room like that. The class is divided into 4 groups. At the center is the provocateur. Students use text evidence. The provocateur asks the questions, so they're prepared to ask questions for the discussion. And students use text evidence to support their thinking, use multiple perspectives, and comprehension becomes pretty active. So what I did when I used this in my classroom, we were in the argumentative unit, and they had three different texts they were comparing about argumentative. So one group had one text, one group had another text, one other group, and then I had my provocateurs, and each provocateur had to prepare questions for each one of the texts, and they rotated through. And so they asked the question, right, about why did you write this way? Why did you use this? What made you say this in your article? So they literally had to take the stands of the author's perspective. And I did this, I'll never forget, I did this the day before Christmas break. And these kids were rocking it. And I had them engaged all the way through. So this is something if you really want to have multiple perspectives of multiple texts that you can integrate into your classrooms for have them. And then their performance assessment really is seeing how their perspectives changed. And then lastly, the one I will touch on today is the Socratic seminar, which again is really an advanced form of discussion. It's structured, it's student-led, it's discussion focused on exploring those complex ideas. So a seminar is really set up where, again, the advantages is it builds critical thinking, provides a tool for reading comprehension, it develops speaking and listening skills, and it practice using text evidence. So how this all worked with me, right? It's a seminar. There would be, a seminar would be an inside bowl, and they would all have just like this picture here, where the students had their questions ready to go. Somebody would lead and start this discussion. They'd have their stems, they would have an intention, and they would be recording each other. Like this person asked a question, this person didn't ask a question. So they also had to prod each other to make sure they were participating. I loved using Socratic Seminar with my seventh graders. It was very powerful tool for creating this really organic, deep discussion of thinking. So how does this really all happen here? So you have to choose a rich text. It's got to be something, and I know I used this when I was in my literary nonfiction unit. The students have read the text. They must prepare open-ended, thought-provoking questions. So again, that's all that work that I've done or we've done that prepared them to just have their own questions. That was part of their homework. They had to come in prepared for discussion. Um, I've already set the expectations and the norms. I arrange the room in a double circle. The teacher will facilitate the discussion through direction and scoring. So there's a lot of different ways you can score. And guess what, friends? It's all in my book. Everything is in the book that explains how to do this, how to implement it immediately, and all the handouts. Okay. But I would really, really encourage people to kind of really spread their wings and use seminar in their classrooms. And at the end, the students reflect and then they self-assess when it's done. And that was part of their grade. They had to assess themselves on how well they answered the questions, how they participated, their goals for the next discussion. So I always made them reflect on their participation. So really, and it comes back, as Jen mentioned that, my Maxwell experience. How does this really all work, right? We have to plan for it. We just can't wing this work, right? It really comes down to really the laws of preparation, right? We cannot deliver what we have not developed. And we have to, if you wing it, success is impossible. If you work for it, success is inevitable. And so, how does this all work? And we have to make sure that we are planning for speaking and listening, just like we're planning for reading and writing. And it has to be intentional. We have to spend time in our classrooms making sure that we're creating that culture of talk in our classrooms. We have to make sure that we're teaching behaviors and we're practicing them. We have to set norms and use anchor charts so everybody's grounded in the expectations. And really critically, it's like we have to teach questioning, we have to model questioning, we have to teach questioning, and then we have to support the use of sentence stems. Um, and this could be done. I had a 64-minute class period. And I was with my kids every day. And this can be done in within your confines of your unit. So I think we covered all our intentions today, right? What is the role of language in supporting reading comprehension? Right? If we want to get kids to write deeply, we have to get them to think deeply, and that means we got to get them talking. The research that reveals the role of oral language in the classroom, how we go about creating this culture of talk, and then what practices, like what techniques can we use to promote accountable talk. So again, you can find me if you're secondary. There's a Facebook page that I moderate. It's basically mine, but other people throw lots of stuff on there. It's called Simple View for Secondary Literacy. If you want to be around secondary people and have secondary dialogue, there's that. That's my website, and that is my QR code. And as Jen said, there's this great book coming out in April. Reading is an optional, fulfilling the promise of literacy for secondary students. I'm the lead editor. I've written a couple chapters. Jen wrote a chapter. We have amazing leaders and experts that have come together to put this book that's really about transforming literacy in our middle school and high schools. So I'm going to let Jen kind of just stop for some questions. I know we have a couple minutes before she's going to close her down for tonight. So I'll stop sharing and you can put your mic on, Jen.
Yep, I'm coming. All right. Thank you, Jeannie, for your energy and enthusiasm and just the power of talk. I think we are missing that in a lot of classrooms. I
Mhm.
have a question for you. One that came from the chat box first. When they were talking about save the last word for me, you mentioned lines, pick 3 lines. And the question was, why not sentences? I'm assuming lines is equivalent to
Quotes. I
sentences
hated
for
to
you.
use quote, but yeah, basically it's like they say like pick a quote, but you're not picking a quote, right?
Right. You're
You're
picking a line or a
you're
sentence
picking a
from.
line, you're picking a sentence, you're picking a paragraph because it's your quote on your page. You don't pick a quote, right? I struggle with that, Jen. Like I'm not picking a quote. I'm picking a
Yeah.
line that resonates with
Well,
me.
because a quote, you're like, oh, I have to look for dialogue. I mean, some of your kids would think that, right? Versus like anything that hits you.
Anything that hits you, that's the beautiful thing, right?
Yep.
Anything that resonates with you.
Perfect. And then I want to take what you shared today. I was in classrooms today, K-8, and one of the district's priorities is student talk. And so teachers are trying to create these opportunities to have kids talk. They've got them and their partners, they gave them a talking task, but in several of the rooms, they're also required to like write down their response, right? And so when the teacher's like, hey, turn and talk to your partner and then, record your response, they go straight to silence and record their response. It seems like the task is driving them to not actually engage in the talk that the teacher is, trying to elicit.
That's
Any
fascinating.
tips, suggestions? It was bizarre.
Well,
I've
my
never seen
question
kids so
is
dedicated to the sheet,
what's the intention for the talk?
right? Yeah. Yep.
Why are we talking? Are we talking because we want to hold them accountable for what the response was? Because if we want to hold them accountable for response, there's other ways to hold them accountable.
Well, and it seems like the accountability is like, okay, talk and then write it down, right? Like the
Well,
like a verbal response is insufficient as accountable. And I don't know for sure, but it's the feel I got that kids knew what was more important was the written response was recorded than
because
the
they want to
actual
get them to
interaction,
practice writing. Again,
right?
it's really comes
Purpose.
down to like, what is your intention for the talk? And if we want to get, because if you go back to 7 minutes of production per class period, you're not going to get 7 minutes production if you spend the time listening and writing.
Yep. Yep. It was just, I wanted like taking what you said, like assign who goes first. Even that move I have seen empower kids to talk because it's not stare at each other, wait for someone to speak, especially in middle school, where they're like waiting each other out. It's like person one go, and they
Because you have
are
to
more likely to
maintain your
go.
pace, right?
Yep.
Right. And so it was like, okay. And I always, like I said, I had odds numbers. So I'd say, if you're odd number, you're talking. If you're even number, you're listening. Be prepared to share out.
Yeah, and I think that even that move, Jeannie, like ones and twos or whatever, I've had teachers get really creative, like whose shoe is bigger. It takes them 30 seconds to decide whose shoe is bigger, and it's just a waste of time. So, like the simple one, two, well, I was in a classroom Tuesday, chips and salsa. Great, chips go first. Like, just have a way to say who goes first. Even adults will do it if you do professional learning. They'll be like, okay, go ahead and talk to your partner. They will politely wait for someone to speak instead of if I say, person closest to the whiteboard go first, talk happens so much quicker, and I can get to that 7 minutes way sooner.
Well, and that's just it, right? Because particularly in middle school and high school, like they're going to wait for somebody else to do the talking.
Mm-hmm.
And the
Yep.
confident kids, they're going to wait for the extrovert confident kid to do the talking.
Yeah. One of my high
And
schools, the principal was doing their evaluation. Teacher asked 17 questions in the lesson. Teacher answered 17 questions. Kids will let the teacher talk if they will allow if they do. Teachers are doing their best, but there are some things that like we can be more intentional about, like you said, planning your questions, thinking about how to train kids, how to develop questions. Because part
well,
of,
I think that's the big thing, right? We have to get kids to write and ask their own questions.
yep,
And if we
and
don't model it and give them practice to that, they're going to ask those just right there recall questions.
totally,
And I suffered from that myself for a long time. I'm like,
yeah,
I can't get these kids to answer the right questions. And then I learned like, oh, I gotta teach them how to do this.
absolutely. Well, Jeannie, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure. I appreciate your enthusiasm, your knowledge on this topic, and I have a passion for oral language because of my ML background. And like it helps multilinguals so much if we can get them with practice with a partner, that accountable talk, everyone talks. I'm going to pull that stick and you better be ready because you had an opportunity. It really changes the kind of positive pressure to engage in the lesson. With that said, we are thankful for Jeannie and her knowledge and sharing with us tonight. We do have some future speakers coming up if these are not
Ooh.
already on your radar. We've got Dr. Jake Downs, who's really going to dig into comprehension. And I think similar to Jeannie, like we're going to get past thinking comprehension is measuring, can they answer main idea questions? Can they make an inference? But truly understanding what comprehension is and how to yield that product that we want through purposeful instruction. So he is coming to join us February 3rd. If you're not able to make them live, they are recorded. And if you're registered, we send out the recordings to participants. So just know that that's an option. And then one I'm super excited about because this is who I have a professional crush on in the world is Dr. Tim Shanahan. He's going to come talk about the end of leveled reading. We know better. Let's do different. But as a teacher who was trained heavily on how to level kids in text and to match kids to their reading, that is not what the research supports. And I think it's time to shift our mindset. He's going to share what we know and how to scaffold that out. So, looking forward to both of those discussions. We can all learn and extend our current thinking and challenge ourselves and sometimes our philosophy. I know I had to be challenged many years ago to stop leveling kids in text because I've been so well trained to do that. So come join us for that thought-provoking conversation. It'll be on February 19th. Same, same place, same channel. I'll be there to host and looking forward to having you join us. And these conversations, please share with your friends, repost when you see them. We really want to help all educators. I know we have over 200 people signed up for the Shanahan session, so that will be a popular one, and we're excited to be able to host these lovely experts who really have a lot of knowledge to share with us and get us to think a little bit, just push ourselves a little bit more. So have a great rest of your whatever day of the week it is, Thursday. Nope, Wednesday. I honestly don't know. It's day. And we
It
will
is
see you next time.
Thursday.
Thank you. Appreciate you, Jeannie. Sometimes a girl needs help.
I hear ya.
Thanks all. See if I can get my recording.